Hello and welcome to video number 7 in the Lenticular Masterclass. I'm Jared Hoffman, and today we're going to be talking about the history of lenticular. So this is going to be a little different from most of the workshops and practical lessons that we've been doing, and we're just going to go through a quick lecture, about 10-15 minutes, to talk about where this art form came from, what was the technological context of lenticular printing. Before we start, I want to mention that most of the research that I'm going to talk about here comes from Dr. Kim Timby, who wrote this fantastic book called 3D and Animated Lenticular Photography Between Utopia and Entertainment. I really recommend this book if you want to dive deeper into this history, but this is the overview. Let's jump in. So the first thing that I found when I was researching this is something called the tabula scalata, which translates to picture ladder. And this is like a really rudimentary form, and this happens in the Renaissance, and people are drawing these pictures of these triangular forms. You can see it here. Already the idea is formulating about when you shift your perspective, you could see a separate image, and that could be cool. And then really things start to take off after the Industrial Revolution with the stereoscope. And the idea behind the stereoscope is we're going to mimic human vision. So we've got two eyes and we see out onto the world from two slightly different perspectives. But what if we took two photographs and we allowed you to sort of combine that vision? And this became a huge novelty. I mean, these stereoscopes were widely made and they were consumer products. And there's a National Archives that you can go on now and you can find thousands of stereoscopic photographs which provide that illusion of the full vision of depth from two angles. Now, in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, we have this booming proliferation of invention around animation and photography. Things like the zoetrope become popular and these early motion picture devices. So Thomas Edison is a big player in this. He invents this thing called the kinetoscope, which is kind of, you look through a little peephole and you see film moving and it creates the illusion of animation. You've got flip books and you've got literally dozens, maybe hundreds of devices that inventors all over the world are finding new ways to display the photographic image to bring more life to it. And you start to see things like this. This is a little postcard that was a novelty item. You could probably get it for what would today be $1 or $2. And it's a little moving picture thing. And it's got a line screen in it. And it's creating animation. And this is an exciting novelty for people. And it's really starting to open people's minds to the moving picture as a concept. And just around this time, we get kind of the first lenticulars, or what we would recognize as a lenticular today. And this is a patent from 1906 showing a lenticular postcard. Look at this picture from different angles. You flip it and you see a separate picture. But at the very same time, and I think this is important to think about in terms of context, cinema is really taking off. So you've got these parallel tracks of invention. You've got people working on the phonograph and early record players and sound. You've got people working on lenticular and that sort of the depth photography and the illusion photography. You've got others who are working on cinema and motion pictures. And these turn out to be, of course, the people who win the game, let's say, of invention, because cinema turns out to be a huge hit. And so the first movie theater, called the Nickelodeon, is introduced in 1905. Within a few years, there's thousands of them all across the United States. And so at this point, the lenticular is kind of a niche side thing. Maybe some scientists and photographers and artists are working on these problems of depth and illusion in a printed photograph, but they just can't hold a candle to a projected movie where the characters are animated. They can sync up sound with the movie using a phonograph, and they can actually have sound and picture moving. I mean, it's everything we know of today as video, and it's got to be so exciting in this early period for people to see this, that it just pushes lenticular into this tiny niche. Even so, lenticular has its own niche, and using that line screen process, you've got some people like John Jolly, who's a French researcher, and he's developing a version of color photography using basically the same principles as lenticular photography. So instead of just taking multiple photos from different perspectives, he says, well, what if we take multiple photos from the same perspective and we capture the red, the blue, and the green spectrums of light, and then we layer those on top of each other? That could create a color photograph. And so all of this is a part of trying to deepen the illusion of a photograph, trying to create more perceptual realism in photography. So it's a really fascinating and exciting time for these inventors. And you can imagine for the general public too, as every few years there seems to be some new invention about, showing pictures in a new way. And along these lines, this guy Lipman and the Eugene Estonov, a lot of this is happening between Paris, Chicago, and New York. And so Paris is a big, center of invention here. And there starts to be this idea, well, we've taken the stereoscope, we've seen from two eyes, but what if we wanted to truly capture a scene of reality? A photograph is really just capturing a flat picture, right? You have no differentiation between something that's deep in the distance and something that's up close. So how would we do that? And this starts to become the idea of light field photography. The idea of capturing the light not just in terms of its darkness and lightness in a particular area, but also in terms of the time at which it strikes the camera, or the relative distance from the camera of the different objects. So we're going to jump forward here. From the period of the early 1900s to World War II, the lenticulars that were being made in portrait studios and in quite impressive scientific facilities were using glass plates. So the lenticular ridges actually were made of glass. But what happens after the war, and in large part this is because of the development of technology for military uses, plastic becomes a big factor in all sorts of industries, and it totally changes the lenticular field because you can make plastic lenticular screens. They are so much less expensive to produce. They're easier to upkeep. They're lighter, they're flexible, and they can be shipped all over the world. And this opens up mass-produced lenticular objects. So we get lenticular postcards, and we get keychains and pins. You can see this technology now becoming a mainstream object that's going to affect culture in so many ways. And here's some of those ways. It's making its way into art. Man Ray has got an object that's swinging back and forth with a lenticular eye opening and closing. It's becoming used for postcards and in particular religious iconography. Now, why would religious iconography be a good fit for these 3D photographs? Well, it turns out that it's very hard to shoot a good 3D scene of a lot of motion because there's things happening and all this. So what some promoters and artists do is they set up little dioramas, like shoebox dioramas of these religious scenes, and they shoot the diorama after it's all been lit and set up perfectly. So miniatures become the subject matter for 3D photographers for quite a while, and they produce a whole bunch of postcards in 3D based on these miniature dioramas. And corporate America gets into the game. They decide, hey, this is a gimmick that we can use to sell our products. And probably every big corporation in America at some point, their marketing department says, hey, let's use lenticular. And I think it's kind of interesting how this has gone from essentially a high-end science project in the early 1900s to a commercial, a novelty that can get distributed worldwide and is based on this technology of now color printing, mass manufacturing of plastics, global transportation, and the kind of advertising and corporate industrial boom after the war. Now, in the 1980s, personal photography is taking off, and these guys in Jerry Nims and some, I don't remember the other guy's name, but they form a company called NIMSLO, and they decide we're going to do 3D photography as a consumer photography product. And the NIMSLO is introduced. It's got 4 lenses, and this becomes a hit. In 1982, it's the fastest selling 35mm camera in the United States. And they have a plan that you're going to take your film, you're going to put it in a canister, and you're going to ship it off to a processing facility in Arizona or New Mexico or something like that. And at this facility, they're going to take the film, they're going to scan it, and they're going to make lenticulars out of it and send it back to you. This is the whole business model for them. But what happens? It falls flat. Their producer of plastics was 3M, and 3M fails to deliver the amount of lenticular at the quality that they need, and so they're not able to fulfill their orders. They're getting a huge backlog of film that's piling up. People are waiting months and years for their film to get developed into lenticulars, and eventually the whole business fails. They end up selling their business to a Japanese company, NISHIKA, which continues to make the cameras. But the idea of making lenticulars of every person's print who uses these cameras, it's just not happening. And then in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the internet revolution hits. And here comes the GIF. I just think this is so cool. Within 100 years, look at how far animation has come. We've gone from a still frame-by-frame conceptual animation phase using very rudimentary techniques like those barrier strips and a flip book. And now we have a digital GIF that can play on loop again and again and again. It's in color and it's spread across screens all over the world. And with that GIF, we get a revival just in the last 10 years of lenticular and 3D photography. This guy who I've met, a New York artist named Mr. GIF, he revives the art form. He finds one of these cameras and he turns his 3D photograph into a GIF. What a match made in heaven. And this just opens up a whole area of hobbyists, 3D photographers, and people who are really curious about the idea of simulating depth in a photograph, excuse me. Maybe that's why you came to this course or why you're watching this video, is because you've seen some of these GIFs floating around the internet. So, okay, that's about 120 years of history in 10 minutes. Where do we go from here? Well, I think this is, to try to see this at a high level, we can see that the technology is one thing leading to another. We've got Looking Glass Factory. They're developing a holographic display that's basically just a digital lenticular at a much higher resolution. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg is investing heavily in his metaverse concept and Oculus Rift, virtual reality, which is not so different from a stereoscope. And this is what I want to look at here. So the stereoscope becomes virtual reality. The lenticular card becomes the holographic display. And so you can see technology just building upon itself. The same ideas that have been around for 500 years, really, but especially in the last 150, they're just kind of cycling over and over again and reinventing themselves with newer components, better manufacturing, tighter resolutions, and we're really starting to head towards this future where the simulation of reality itself is becoming we're becoming so good at that simulation that we're running into this level that you may not be able to distinguish between a simulated environment or a simulated image and the real world itself, which is pretty stunning for considering this has only been maybe 150 years of this tech development. But then again, as we've seen, technology builds upon itself.
this goes back thousands of years, and it raises some very interesting philosophical questions about technology and art and humanity. Like, why do we find these technologies so fascinating? What is it about experiencing a moment again and again and again that humans seem to be drawn towards? Why do we love to take pictures of ourselves and look back at ourselves in different ages? Is it worth pursuing these technologies to the end that we have? And if so, why is it worth it? There's some story about capitalism here, because these technologies are capitally driven. In other words, the types of technologies that get developed are the ones that the markets reward with money and success. So what I'm saying here is that these technologies are winning because people want them. People are willing to pay for them. And so that's why we continue to develop them. And this is just kind of a frame for this whole discussion. What does this look like? What do pictures look like in 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years? I mean, we've only looked at 150 years of technology development in this short video, and we've come so far. It's really mind-blowing to imagine what's possible going forward. So I'll leave you with that, and we'll continue next week with some more practical lessons about making lenticulars on our own. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.